Good morning again. Welcome to today's webinar on the new PAS forms and instructions. Some housekeeping, just to let you know that throughout the webinar, you can feel free to click on the chat box and submit your questions, and we will look at your questions and answer them at the end of the presentation. Okay, so at this time, we are just really fortunate today to have as our presenters Teresa Young from the Treatment Data Management Unit. We are really grateful for her taking out the time to come and present on today. And myself, Brenda Harris-Collins, and Mr. Henry Kurtzman. We are both from the Practice Innovation and Care Management Division.
Good morning, everyone. You can move the slides forward. And so our objectives for today for the training are to help providers locate new PAS forms. Teresa will identify how to find the forms on the OASIS website. We want you to understand the new data items and their use. We spent a lot of time on what needs to be done, and actually we believe that when you know the why, you can find the value in the collection of this data. We will explore when participants can be transferred, when they can be transitioned, and what the documentation will look like for the movement within the elements of Part 820 and other levels of care. We will also review monthly service reports. So let's get some context. As our system is transitioning from Part 819 intensive residential, Part 819.9 community residence, Part 819.10 supportive living, Part 816 medically monitored crisis, to Part 820, you, as the providers, identified the need for revisions in admission, discharge, and data collection and reporting documentation. The genesis for the transformation of our residential services has been in response to the treatment provider's query for enhanced staff and services to meet the needs of the participants we serve, and the vehicle to address those gaps has been the State National Medical Redesign Initiative, which recognizes the critical role that you as treatment providers in residential treatment services play in addressing substance use disorders. Our charge has been to respond to the triple aim of improving quality and experience of care, improving the health of the populations we serve, and reducing per capita costs of health care. To your credit, as OASIS certified providers, you've been at the forefront as the unsung heroes who have diligently been meeting those aims and getting very little credit for all the hard work you do. These revisions in the collection of data are designed to capture and quantify the work that you're doing. Teresa will begin to walk you through the process.
Good morning. So what we have here is the application's home site, which is where the forms can be found. It's on the Home tab under CDS Documentation, and we've highlighted the date of 4/1/17. So all our new forms and instructions are there. You don't need a login ID if you just want to look at them.
So you're saying that draft versions are available, so although I can see the forms and instructions, now I still cannot use them until April 1st?
You won't be able to use them until April 1st, but all the drafts are there to view, as well as the batch specifications for electronic transmissions.
Okay, great.
This is just a shot of what the forms links look like. So we'll see each form, and then underneath will be a link to the instructions that go with that form.
Okay, so when should I start working with my EHR vendor to input these new forms?
Depending on what you do, if you do batch submissions, some people have already started testing, so we hopefully started that in October, around that time, but you can start at any time, and I would say as soon as possible.
Okay, great.
To be prepared for the April 1st deadline. So here we have what some of the new items that will be on the forms. The element of care and reintegration setting are specific to Part 820 program. The other new items, such as locator ID and created date, ICD-10 diagnosis code, and on the next slide we have some physical health related items, such as asthma, hypertension, diabetes, result of TB test, treated for latent TB, and experiencing or witnessing trauma will appear on admissions and discharge forms as well as the crisis forms for all services. We've also expanded the discharge disposition to include basically extending noncompliance due to program rules, violence, substance use, or possession of contraband.
So earlier in the webinar, we spoke about exploring the why, so as it pertains to physical health conditions, we decided to add those specific questions in there so that the work you as providers do on a daily basis could be captured. The work that you're doing has a really positive impact on many chronic health conditions, and we're attempting to capture that, making the case that the demographic population you provide services to is best served in residential care.
And also, you see that there's some questions regarding trauma. And as we move to a trauma-informed system of care, we want to ensure that LENS is utilized from admission to discharge. We also expanded the language around domestic violence, which is more general and can include elder abuse, child abuse, abuse to include intimate partner violence, which is more specific and targeted to intimate partners.
In the discharge disposition, again, we're being more specific, and I think that'll help you identify trends of violence or contraband in your facility and provide data that it can inform agency services or staffing. So those were the whys as to what, and the intent of adding those new data items to PAS forms.
Here we have what the admission form will look like. When entering a client for a Part 820 residential treatment episode, you'll be asked to select the element of care as well as the reintegration setting if it applies.
So what is the difference between, I see congregate and scattered site reintegration? What is the difference between those two?
If a program is certified to provide the element of reintegration, it will also indicate the setting. Congregate is provided in a community living experience with on-site staff available 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Scatter site is housing provided at various locations where staff provide case management and supervision through in-house weekly visits.
Okay, great.
This is just a shot of the user interface showing where you'll put in the element of care in reintegration setting.
So now we're looking at transfers and transitions.
Yes. Excuse me. The 47 has been updated to collect Part 820 program data when a client is transferring between two residential programs. You'll have to select the element of care in the reintegration setting.
So we don't have to do admissions and discharge for interagency transfers anymore?
No, not between residential services.
Providers have been asking for that for years. Providers are really going to like you, Teresa, for making this happen.
Here we have the transfer form, and it just shows the new data items that have been added.
Wow, Teresa, this form looks too simple to be true. You're going to ask for some more stuff somewhere. I know it just can't be this simple.
No, it's this simple. We really wanted to keep it pretty easy to expedite the changes in element of care. This is a screenshot of what the transfer screens look like on the user interface. You'll see that there's now an option to select not only the program and the date that the transfer happens, but also the elements of care and the reintegration setting if it applies. So not huge changes, just a couple extra clicks if you need to.
So the changes that we're discussing on various PAS forms appear to be relevant for all levels of care, not just Part 820 programs. Is that true?
Some of the changes apply to all services, but the element of care and the reintegration setting are specific to the Part 820 program.
Gotcha. So that has to do with all of those changes within elements of care in Part 820. That's what this is designed to actually capture.
Correct.
Thank you.
Programs are able to transfer the clients, residential clients, as shown on this grid on the next slide, between residential programs and allow us to capture any element changes as those transfers occur. If it's going into a reintegration element, they'll have to select the settings. This grid shows the allowable transfers specific to Part 820 programs. So you can see where the shaded areas are that any residential program can transfer into or out of a Part 820 residential program. So you can transfer from a community residence to a Part 820 or vice versa.
Okay, this is a little bit confusing. And I know we see all of these dots and how this is going. What is allowable and why?
Allowable means OASAS, various units in OASAS, decided that services were similar and that as a client moved through different services, we didn't need to collect all of the admission discharge data. And we could make it easier for the providers to report those changes by just doing a transfer form with that minimal amount of data. So we look at like services, and this is what's been decided, that residential programs, especially with the Part 820 change, because it incorporates what has been seen as community residence, supported living, those settings, that they shouldn't have to submit those lengthy admissions and discharge forms. So we've developed what is approved and what our system will tolerate for transfers.
So looking at the grid, it kind of appears that transfers can happen in all the elements of care, and that if I was going to crisis, that would not be able to happen. I couldn't transfer to an inpatient rehab, or I couldn't transfer to a medically supervised.
Correct.
Great, thanks for clarifying that.
The element transition form, pretty similar to the transfer form. This is to be completed when a client stays in the same program but changes elements of care. A transfer form is when a client is changing programs under a provider. A transition form is when a client is changing elements of care or reintegration setting within a program.
So if I have a resident completing supportive living and going into a transitional apartment under the same agency umbrella, do I have to use a transfer form?
I guess I would ask, what are you calling a transitional apartment?
Yeah, that's kind of, so supportive living is usually considered transitional apartments.
Right.
So the question in the chat box is a little confusing to us, and whoever put that in there would need to flush that out a little bit more. Let's move on.
This is, again, as our user interface. Under client management, you'll see that we will have a link starting 4.1 for element transition, and if you click on that link, it will take you to a screen, and at this screen, you can either search using the drop-down boxes at the top of the screen by client or by program. You can also search by time period. You can limit seeing transactions to only the most recent elements, or you can see the elements for all the clients that have been in that program. This would be as you search through a specific client history. You can then choose from the drop-down element transition and complete the transition that way. So there are different ways to do the element transition depending on what's most convenient for the provider.
Okay, so this gives me the opportunity to toggle through by using the drop-down box, and I could query for whether it's an individual client or entire program, and so it gives me different options again, right?
Yes, different options, whatever is simplest and most convenient for the provider when they're inputting their data.
So now we're going to look at discharges, the discharge form.
So on our discharge form for Part 820 programs, you will see at the top elements of care, including the reintegration setting, and those days and elements will pre-fill based on the admission and discharge date entered for the transaction. So you won't be able to alter those dates on the discharge form, but you can view them and see if they look correct.
Okay, great.
This is our user interface, just showing where the days will be shown for Part 820 programs. Also, you'll notice a history button on the discharge form, and we'll also see the history button, on the transfer form and transition form. History button is new for us. It is for Part 820 programs only, and it will show the client's history in that program. So if you click on the history button, you end up seeing this pop-up window, which starts with the admission and will show all transitions, transfers to and from elements of care. So you can review that and see if it looks correct. If it looks like you missed a transition or something's missing, you then know to go back and edit it through whatever appropriate screen would be.
So clicking on the history allows me to see the entire episode for that individual in treatment?
Yes.
Excellent.
Locator ID is something that is not specific for the Part 820 programs. It will be for all services completing the admission, discharge, and transfer and transition form, if appropriate. So we are asking that the assessment ID be entered on those forms, also would be created on date. It's an optional item. If you don't have it, you can still input the data, so it's not a reason to hold up your data input, okay, but we are asking that you make an effort to put it in. On April 1st, we currently have Part 820 programs that are active and up and running and providing clients with services. On April 1st, clients that are currently admitted in those programs will be assigned to an element of care automatically by our computer system. Programs are then responsible for looking at these assignments and updating if needed. So it's possible that a client could be put into the rehab element when they're actually in the reintegration element, and it will be the program's responsibility to correct that.
So I actually have to go into the system, take a look at my entire population and the assignments, and make the changes at that time.
Yes.
I don't have to do a new locator at that time.
We assume that the locator was done at the time that the client went into his or her current element of care.
Exactly.
So this is just correcting basically a clerical assignment. So you don't need to do a locator to do this correction, but you should have the locator in place documenting the client's current elements of care.
And this all goes live April 1st?
Yes. This grid shows basically what our hierarchy of assignments will be. The first column shows if your program is certified to do these elements with this reintegration setting, we would be putting your clients into, the top one is rehabilitation, and that will be the preferred elements of care for most assignments.
Okay.
Okay. Now we're going to look at the monthly service delivery report.
Yes. There's PAS 48 that will be specific to Part 820 programs. Most data items on the new form will pre-fill. So when you look at the new form, it looks kind of lengthy, but all the graded areas on that form will pre-fill, such as days in element, admissions, discharges. Those sorts of items will automatically be showing. We are changing some of the collection items. We'll be changing the data collected for staffing. We've traditionally collected full-time equivalent vacancies for staff. We'll be changing some of those staff roles, and we have some screenshots of what those staff roles will be. We'll continue to collect clinical supervision, number of admission assessments completed, and if the program is approved as an employment and vocational services provider, they will still need to complete the employment and vocational status section.
So I'm not counting any more counseling sessions?
Not anymore.
For the monthly report?
No.
Okay. And, okay, that's pretty cool.
What the change to be aware of is the staffing resource section. The MSD will collect staffing vacancies only as compared to the approved staffing plan that was submitted to the Bureau of Certification. So approved staffing plan items will pre-fill based on the submitted plan. If the program decides to hire above the approved staffing plan, vacancies should not be documented on the MSD report.
So if I hire more staff than was originally approved, there's no need to delineate that in any way?
No. If you, let's say your approved staffing plan for LMSWs were 2, so you'll see a 2 in that grayed out column under LMSW, and you decide as a program that you want 3, and you have 2 currently employed, you're looking for the third one, you wouldn't document that vacancy. You would put down a 0 because you've got the 2 LMSWs that are currently employed.
I think it's kind of neat that this is going to self-populate, and so I don't have to really do anything about that. I just have to ensure that the number that's being self-populated is actually what the agreed upon staffing pattern was that I sent into certification, and that's the agreed upon staffing pattern that I had a conversation about with my field office, and so that will all be done by the computer. That's great.
Try to keep it simple.
Okay, so having said that, you know, we've really expedited this entire process. You know, I see a lot of ways that we've streamlined things. I see a lot of ways that we've tried to reduce staff time and expedite the process. If you've got any questions specific to the 820 transition, those questions should go to the Pickham mailbox. On the other hand, don't ask Pickham about PAS forms because that's not our expertise. If you go to the next slide, Teresa will tell you.
We have a contact information sheet here, which I thought might be helpful as sort of a directory of where to ask about different systems. So technical assistance like logging in, password IDs, IRM 15s, those sorts of things go to the help desk. the ITS help desk, and we have their contact phone number and email. CDS forms and questions would go to the Treatment Data Management Unit, and they have a unit phone number there, as well as our email address. We would also handle questions on PPSI and provider and program contacts, which should be updated whenever there is a change in staffing. Those contacts in the provider directory system are used for listservs and any emails sent from OASAS, including emergency emails, so we ask that you make sure that that data is correct. HCS and Locator has their own number and email provided, as well as treatment availability dashboard goes to statewide field office. E-Fines is handled by Kevin Doherty, and then any clinical billing and regulatory issues would go to the Pickham mailbox.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Teresa, and Henry, thank you so much. We still have some questions that have come in and that we want to address. So one of the first questions is, which form should be used for transfers from 819 to 820?
What service of 819?
So none of these forms are related to transferring a person from 819 to 820.
Right. When those initial transfers are made within if your agency is transitioning from an 819 to an 820, all that's going to be required there is that you obviously are doing the locator to identify the level, the appropriate element of care that the person belongs in, and part of that transition process should be documented with a group note, to be placed into the record. There's not going to be an admission, discharge form, transfer, or transition when you initially make that first.
There is a transfer. There is the PAS 47. If you have a program that is converting from, say, an intensive residential to a Part 820 program, you have some options at the time that your program converts. The options are, you can discharge all your clients and readmit them using the admission and the discharge form. You can have us administratively discharge them for you and then readmit them using the PAS 44 and doing that admission form, or you can do the PAS 47 for your clients, which I always think is the simplest, least painful way to go if you're converting. So I encourage people to do the 47. I think it's a less work on the staff's part, but it is the provider and field office decision how they want to do that transition.
Okay, great. Thank you, Teresa.
Yep.
That's a big help. Another question is, I am currently a vocational rehabilitation counselor. Will we be called education employment specialist when 820 is in effect?
That's the language that I believe
that we're moving towards?
Yes. Yeah.
Next question is, will stats still be required to be entered by the 5th of each month?
Yes, admissions and discharges, transfers and transitions are still due by the 5th of the month. MSCs are due by the 10th of the month.
Okay. I've noticed that LMFT is a field commonly not listed to OASIS documents. Is there a possibility that it could be added to the listing of staffing resources, licensed marriage and family therapists?
That wasn't what we were, no. Not at this time. Not at this revision. We'll consider it in the future.
Do we need a new release to share the increased health information that will be required?
I'm assuming the health information that's required on our PAS form? No, whatever document you're using now to disclose to the clients that you share information with OASAS should be sufficient.
Is the PAS 47 to be completed along with the locator when transferring from 819 to 820?
I would assume, the locator, I would assume, needs to be done to document
Right.
the level of care that the client is going into, if I'm correct.
Okay, but if these,
You would then
but
need to
these
do-
forms are not available to April 1st. So if you're transitioning prior to April 1st, you're just using a locator.
You would use the PAS 47, they're available. They just
Okay.
don't have the elements of care on them currently.
Okay.
If you look at our PAS 47 now,
Okay.
you would have the, you would just identify the program that the client is going to. After April 1st, you would identify the program as well as the element of care and possibly the reintegration setting if that applied.
Okay.
Excellent.
So even if it's happening prior to
Yes.
April 1st, you can use the PAS 47 and the locator to do that.
But it
After
makes it a lot easier
easier.
than the admission and discharge of
Yes.
50, 60.
Right.
It is a lot easier.
Right. So then, if your program has an inpatient treatment unit only with no other services, you will not complete a transfer form following client discharge. And they're responding to an inpatient rehab. These forms are specifically for Part 820, which an inpatient rehab is not a part of. So the transfer and the transition forms, do they apply to any other?
The transition form is specific to 820.
Okay,
It will not be used by any
transition.
other
Okay.
program services. The transfer form can be used by any other program service type with a like service type, such as an outpatient clinic can transfer to an outpatient rehab and vice versa.
Okay.
If a provider had 2 inpatient units and for some reason, I don't think clinically it would be appropriate, but maybe for some reason it happened, they could transfer to an inpatient if it were in.
So it has to be like type.
Yes, it has to be like type under the same provider.
Right.
It would be unusual for an inpatient program to have that.
Yeah.
Okay. We do electronic transfer for our PAS forms. We do not use paper for any form except the PAS 48. Is there any information on when the transfer testing will be available?
Testing started in October. So it is currently available. It started in October of 2016. We do have some providers that have already started testing.
Okay. How can we obtain the new PAS forms?
The forms under one of the first few screenshots, when you go to the applications site, right on the home tab, you'll see OSS documentation forms, and then there's a sub-tab menu of April 1st, 2017. If you click on that tab, it will show you the whole list of the forms, and you can print out or view whatever is of interest.
Okay, if you haven't transitioned by April 1st, do we still use the new forms?
Yes.
So clarifying. Okay, 1 second.
We have a question of what does PAS stand for? It's Program Accountability System.
Okay. So clarifying, on April 1st, I do or do not need to discharge my clients and enter them in under new forms. Example, someone admitted January 1st, 2017. I would need to discharge them and re-enter them using the new forms? Sorry, they're confused.
No, not at all. If you've done an admission January 1st, that's fine. You don't have to do anything. Come May 1st, the client is discharged. You enter the discharge form at that time, and it will be under the new discharge form. You'll see then, but you do not have to go back and redo those admissions forms or anything of that.
Our program has not converted to electronic records yet. Can the new PAS forms be done using paper?
Yes, you can still enter them on the user interface as you have in the past. That's still an option that hasn't changed. So it's the provider's decision if they want to do the electronic transfer user interface.
Okay. You just stated that we can use a transfer form to change from a 822 clinic to an 822 day rehab program in the same provider, but they are not like types of care. They are different levels of care. We have always had discharge from one level of care and admit into the next level of care. Are you saying that now we can handle this with a transfer form?
You've always been able to handle it with a transfer form. They are the same type of service. They're outpatient and outpatient rehab are all 822 services, outpatient clinics. So you can always do it with a transfer form if you want to. It's the provider's decision if they would like to do that or not.
Okay. So there are options, and the provider has to make the decision about what's best for them and what works into their workflow.
Correct. In the past, providers elected not to do the transfer form from the admission for the outpatient rehab because traditionally most clients flow from the outpatient rehab to an outpatient clinic, and they would take all of their performance data with them, and it would lead to poor performance data on the performance report for the program for the outpatient rehab. So they elected to do the admission and discharge form, but it is the provider's decision if they wish to do that or not.
Okay. Our Part 820 will have stabilization and rehabilitation elements. If a person is going to an integration program in the community not affiliated with our agency, will we discharge the person? So they're going to have stabilization and rehabilitation, but the person is going to go to a reintegration program in the community that's not affiliated with their agency. Would they discharge the person?
Yes, they would discharge them to another provider. Would be a discharge and then an admission at the next provider.
Okay. For the monthly service delivery report, if the program has all three elements, stabilization, rehabilitation, and reintegration, will the monthly reporting now all be under the same report, or will we still report for each PRU separately?
No, it will all be one PRU. It will be one, if it's an 820 program with all three elements of care.
And one PRU.
One PRU, it will be one MSD report for the month.
Right. But if they had more than, so if they had a PRU that had stabilization and rehabilitation and a different PRU that had reintegration, that means that they would have to do separate monthly reports for those because it's different PRUs. So the monthly report is specific to that PRU. Do you use the transfer form if a client is graduating out of residential but has been referred to outpatient aftercare?
It would be a discharge from residential, and the admission form should be done at the outpatient clinic.
Because it's not like type.
Right.
So it has to, so one is outpatient and one is residential, so you have to do. Will the April 1st assignment of clients be limited to active 820 programs or all programs 819 and 820? Our 820 will not be operational until July 1st.
It will just apply to currently active 820 programs because in July 1st, when a client is admitted, you will then need to pick or select the reintegration setting and the element of care.
Could a transfer be an outpatient SUD to an outpatient with OTP instead of discharge? So there's outpatient SUD, 822, to an outpatient OTP.
I'd have to check the allowable transfer grids that are specific to outpatient clinics because we brought the residential but not the outpatient clinic. So I would say I would want to verify. I don't think so, but I could check. And if someone wants to email that question to the data management email box and just put my name on it, I'll be glad to do it.
So we're looking at questions. Hold on one second. We'll be right with you. Can you explain the difference between the transfer form and the transition form again, please?
Sure. The transfer form is used when a client is moving between two programs under the same provider. The transition form is when a client is moving between two elements of care within the same program. So they are not changing programs, They're just changing their element of care. The transfer form is when you're actually changing physical programs.
Okay. So is that, can you re-explain again the difference between the PAS 47 and the PAS 125?
Sure. On the PAS 47, you will be asked to select the new program that the client is going to. And if the new program is also a Part 820, you will then have to select the element of care and possibly the reintegration setting. You'll put in the date that the client made that move, and we hope the locator, ID, and assessment. If you're using the PAS 125, which is the transition form, you will only be selecting the element of care as well as possibly the reintegration setting and entering the locator information. And again, the PAS 125 is specific to 820 programs because that addresses the movement between elements of care within the same program, where the transfer form can be used by other services because it addresses the movement of a client between two programs.
Okay.
Thanks so much. That was excellent.
Okay. So will we need to assign a resident to an element of care even if we have not moved to 820? So no.
No, it's specific to the 820.
And one last thing. So when using a transfer form, the client's visit and other program data follows them into the new program. When discharged from the new program, all the visit data from both the old and the new program will have to be entered into PAS 45. N, is this correct?
It is correct. For the visit data is specific to outpatient services.
Okay.
So it would be for an outpatient clinic.
So not in reference to a Part 820.
Not 820, that's specific to an outpatient service.
So we're covering Part 820 today, and I know that there's a lot of questions in regards to 822, and there's a question about when will you be covering that. So I'm sure that Teresa will take that back and see when they will cover that. But we want to stick to the Part 820 question. This is a locator question. If we are running a scattered site and a client happens to still be in the program at the 1-year mark, rare, but this does happen, do the locator forms still need to be updated at the 1-year mark like we do now? Yes. Are we going to have to go into our existing clients and complete transition forms for all of them? That's another question.
For Part 820 program,
Part 820.
If the client makes a change in element of care, yes, you will have to. If they're when they make that change, yes, you need to do the transition form.
Okay. So I think that has been all of the questions that have come in, and we really appreciate all of your questions that you have submitted. Again, this was specifically related to Part 820. Any questions regarding Part 822, that you can send those emails and
to the data management email box. We'll be glad to answer them.
Okay. But we hope that you were able to get some clarity on these new forms and understand what is to take place and how you can access these forms. Is there any?
The webinar will be archived and can be accessed on, Janet?
Yes, so the webinar will be up on the MCTAC website in the next few days along with this slide deck. We'll alert all of you when that goes up. We'll send out an announcement.
So please check your emails for the announcement of when this is available.
Thanks again, everyone, and thank you so much, Teresa.
Well, thank you.
Okay, thanks.